I'll be so real here, but like, Spotify sends you like your monthly listeners,
Okay.
or whatever every month, and like sometimes I'll get an email and it says you had one listener, like on my artist account, and I go like, but I've started to go like, that's awesome. Like, it's awesome that one person in Germany like listened to my song. Like,
Yeah.
if one person isn't enough, 10 million isn't going to be enough, like, because it's not about the number of people who like you, like the dollar amount in your bank account or whatever it is. Like, there's never going to be a threshold that crosses where you say, now I'm okay, and now I can rest in my identity as a music producer. Like, that will never, ever happen.
So today is the first interview podcast on the Persisting and Purpose podcast. And just a reminder of what this is about. This is all about Christians living within their God-given purpose, within their vocation, and going through different thoughts and ideas and challenges of being a believer and living that out in all areas of your life, including family and just faith in general. And so today I'm excited because I get to do an episode with Dylan Bowes. We go back to college. Let's see, what year did you start?
2004.
Okay.
Started it.
So 1 year after I got there, and we both were able to do music, worship with Campus Crusade for Christ, which is now Crew. They've switched to riding boats, I guess. I still don't get it, but we had a fun season of being able to do some worship together. And then music had always been a tie through for Dylan and also for myself. And you've had a pretty unique career path post-college.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah. Heavily focused on music for a good portion of it. And that's kind of shifted now that you're a father. And so I'd love to just start by share a little bit about yourself. How did you went to college for English?
Yes, sir.
So tell us about...
I'm really good at speaking English.
Yes, I can tell. So tell me why you got that degree and then how it shifted or where you went straight from college.
Yeah. Oh, man, why I got that degree, I'm not totally sure exactly. It just seemed like the best thing for me. Yeah, I mean, I was always interested in books and reading and literature. And I think there was a part of me that maybe wanted to write as well. And I do some writing now, but that's really just for fun. But yeah, music was always a giant passion of mine, as it was for you. And so I actually, like, the English degree and music kind of intersected in a weird way at the end of my college career, because I was actually in a master's program. I don't know if you even knew
I don't
that.
think I remember.
Yeah,
that,
Cal Poly, because I didn't know what else to do. So I went back to school and then was playing in a band, and we actually got an opportunity to lead worship at a church in San Diego in the middle of my master's degree. So I actually paused that, a permanent pause, never went back. But so then we, as a band, we went down to San Diego and we played at a church there every week for about 2 years. And then I'm just trying to do like the fast run through here. So then, I basically just fell in love with a girl, and we are coming up on 13 years of marriage this winter. But she was a musician, and I ended up joining her band, which is like breaking rule number 1. You don't date people in your band, but it has worked out. And then so we got married, we moved to LA, and we both kind of pursued music together, playing stuff for her, but then I was also doing songwriting and music production as like a way to try to, have a career making music.
Yeah.
And that was a very interesting, like 10 or so years of life. So we can talk more about that as we go. But then of course, in 2022, had a first little baby on the way, and decided that this like feast or famine style of living on the edge that we had been doing for such a long time was probably ready for like another phase of life. So began pursuing a real job, and that's a long story as well. But then down to the wire, ended up getting a job. Like I interviewed for the role from the hospital when my baby was being born. That's how like down to the wire it got, and it ended up being a total God thing. And and so I've been there ever since, and that's been great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's take a step back, or a few steps back. And what led to the transition from doing the worship to stepping out of that role?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, like I said, at the time, it was a little bit of a whirlwind situation, and probably a lot of it had to do with clouding of vision and judgment because of being in love with this girl who ended up becoming my wife. So that was just like total pure chaos and adventure. The mechanics of how it ended, I think, was like several of us from the band began sort of getting involved in other things as well. And, I think there were definitely a lot of conversations that we had around like, is this a sustainable career path? When we want to have families. I think I was maybe the first one to like pair off, but I can't remember now exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's just a little bit of a different like perspective when you think about incorporating a family and that kind of lifestyle. So that was part of it as well. And I think for myself, like I've always wanted to just do everything. It's really hard for me to put a toy down, I think probably how it actually mechanically worked is I was just trying to hold everything all at once, and I couldn't. So things started to just fall.
Yeah. So was that your sole income at that point?
No, actually we were working at the church, and we all had, each band member had like another job. But this was 2009. So this was like right after the recession. And, so I was working at a children's museum, actually teaching art to kids, which is really fun.
Yeah. And do you remember where that balance of income split was?
It probably ended up being about 50-50.
Okay.
But we lived so cheaply. There were 4 of us in a like 2-bedroom apartment. Like Ryan and I shared a bed. Like we literally slept in a bed together for a while because there just wasn't room for 2 single beds. So yeah, like we were cozy for sure. But it was probably about 50-50.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in that season, like it's interesting, the world of worship and worship, let's call it as a career.
Yeah.
Typically in that path, it's the worship leader and or worship pastor, that primary person who gets paid enough to survive on.
Right.
And so when you started doing it, was it just kind of like, hey, I'm already a part of this band, there's this opportunity, let's try it? Or did you envision seeing that as potential career path?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, and I would say this church was a little bit of a different model than that because like they paid us as a band unit and like we divided it. But yeah, I mean, no, I think for sure I thought we were good enough to like go on the road, and we toured a little bit and we made a couple albums. And so yeah, and I'm still super proud of what we made. Like, but and I learned this lesson later on down the road too. Like, there's not really a meritocracy with that kind of thing. So there's so much just being in the right place at the right time, luck or whatever. So, but yeah, I think it was not just a fun thing. It was like, I would love this to be a part of my life.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And so with was the original dream of the band, you mentioned doing some touring, like,
Yeah.
was it to be like full, like you do this church thing for a while and then ideally you're like one of the worship, I mean, I guess it wasn't pure worship, but like
Yeah.
a Christian band that's full time.
Yeah, there's like this weird spectrum there, isn't it? Like where like there's like bands that are bands but they're Christian, and then there's like a worship band that's where your role is more in a pastoral sense of like creating communion with God or something.
Yeah.
So if we were like a little bit more focused on the latter,
Yeah.
like, and we talked about that, like, well, what if we go on tour for 9 months of the year? Isn't that kind of like weird, because we're part of this church? So but we never really had to answer that question exactly. It was just like, it was something we thought about. Yeah. I mean, I guess the dream, and like part of what's sort of strange about it too is like, as a musician, you dream about touring and playing in front of big crowds and like making great records in expensive studios and stuff like that. So it's a little bit funny how that then overlaps with the pastoral or, vocational ministry part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had this question a little further down, but I think it feels like a good point before we move on. So, but for those listening who don't know, like I had a season of my life where I thought being a vocational ministry worship pastor was potentially my career path.
Yeah.
And I moved to Portland, Oregon to help start a church. And I never had a title. I call myself a volunteer worship pastor. And just because I feel like best describes it, but sometimes because I was never paid for it, nor was I ever given a title. Sometimes I feel like I'm breaking rules by giving myself that title.
You would like wear a little white collar and everything. Yeah.
It didn't come with it since it was volunteer.
Gotcha.
You had to pay extra.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
But, I spent 4 years, 3 or 4 years, I always forget how long, every single weekend in this role as a volunteer, never getting paid. And so I personally have some of my own holdups on whether it's good or bad to have your vocation and your income come from your faith or something related to your faith. Like there's some real tensions there. So being in a position where you were paid by the church to work, but also do something you love, like how did you experience that tension? And where did you go with that?
Yeah. It is just a tension. Like it is weird because in one sense you definitely feel blessed that there's like somebody considers you valuable enough to pay you to do that.
Yeah.
Like, because it's fun, like that's pretty cool, but then like, because I remember going into the office and into my little cubby and like collecting my physical paycheck every couple of weeks. It just makes it like when you then go make a purchase with it, like depending on what you're buying, it makes you think this is coming from people's tithes. That's humbling, and it sort of makes you think a little differently about maybe choices and that you would otherwise just blow past and not think that hard about.
Yeah.
Like stewarding the resources that you have to live on. So
I haven't thought of it that way.
Yeah. I mean, a church has to have staff that do stuff. Like, so like on one level you can just be like, that's what that is. Like there's administrative, there's facilities people, there's, and that's slightly different because if you're in a pastoral role, which I'm just a bass player. Like, let's be honest. I'm just kidding. But, it's a little different, but still, it was definitely a tension. Like, I think then it gets even stranger too. If like some people are volunteers and some are not. And so, but hopefully, hopefully there's at least a good communication around that and like understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of my tensions just in general, not even on the money side with worship being a vocation, for me, I felt very isolated in a Christian bubble.
Yeah.
And like, I feel some of God's giftings he's given me is building relationship with people who don't know the Lord and building great rapport there. And I felt like it limited my ability to do that. And so that was always one of my challenges is like, and one of the things that led me to believe like, maybe this isn't where I'm supposed to be for full time,
Right.
but more on a volunteer basis. Because I kind of just felt closed in.
I mean, you don't have time really to like even go out and do stuff probably too. Especially if you had a full-time job and then you were just volunteering on top of that. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah. And the very first episode I did for this podcast, I talked through how I was doing full-time waiting, doing the worship every weekend, and also starting a photography business all at the same time.
Oh, that's it?
So that was that moment that kind of led to having to make a change.
Yeah.
So you took this leap of faith then. You left these two roles and you moved up to LA, and
leap of faith is maybe too strong of a term. It's more like a stumbling into accidental adventure, but yes.
Okay, I like that. That could be the name of this episode.
Yeah.
Stumbling into an accidental adventure.
Yep.
That could be your next band name too.
I like it.
Hey, that's good.
I like it.
So as you stumbled,
Yeah.
what was your vision there? So let me preface by saying your wife has an amazing voice. The music that I've heard from that season was really incredible. And like you mentioned, like it's not an easy, you use the word meritocracy.
Yeah.
It's not just how good you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it really does have to have all these different things align.
Yeah.
For you to actually make it,
Yeah.
quote unquote, in the music world. So what was the vision that you both had moving to LA to pursue this? Like what was like the dream?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I'll begin by saying I remember sitting on the curb in Golden Hill in San Diego and talking to my dad on the phone because I was like, there's this girl. She's really talented and she wants me to be in her band, but she, I might have to just like live in my car for a while, which I did without telling her. But, and my dad, and I was just like, I want to do what's wise. And my dad was like, this is a common thing too. My dad said like, you regret things you don't do rather than things you do, like when you're older. So he was like, take a risk, I guess. That was his sort of advice to me. It's a great question. Like, what is the vision for what that lifestyle could look like? And it evolved somewhat as things do, but it became a question that we wrestled with a lot, and including up until conversations that like Nikki and I have had like several weeks ago, like up until today, years and years later, which is what does success, how do you measure success in something in a creative field? It's such a difficult question. It's like a philosophical, spiritual question, but also like a tangible one because you have to live and eat,
Right.
And I think that question probably should have been something we discussed more like in the beginning. So like that's something that I try to, like whenever I talk to younger folks, I try to help them think about that like as early as possible. But I mean, to me it was just like if I don't have to do other side hustles to like survive, then that to me, Like I'm okay with that, you know? Like I don't have to be in a house on the hills. Although that would be cool. But like just being able to do it and have that sustain me would have been cool, you know.
So on the spectrum for creatives, you know, you have one side which is like, I want to be creative and do this creative endeavor, whether or not I make money. Like I just like I don't really care about the money. I just want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
So whatever makes me do this. On the other side of the scale, you have, I need to make money and I want to make money well with this creative endeavor. Where would you say you and Nikki fell on that?
Yeah, that's a great question too. You know, I mean, I'm tempted to say somewhere in the middle, because like it was never, for me, it was never just like just a hobby or something. Like I have other creative things that that get the juices out that like I've never thought about making money from it, but like this, I knew I was talented enough to do it and like driven enough to do it, but yeah, but there were also like, with the communities and the circles that we ran in, there were many moments where I would have to sort of say no to things, because it was like, I'm not willing to do that just to make money. So that's interesting too.
Yeah.
Like, cause you like, and it's not even like anything hardcore, but just sort of like artistic integrity, or like that would make me feel icky, like to do. So, yeah. And that becomes tough too, because like you know, you're like struggling so hard to get any opportunity you can. And then like when one arises that you have to say no to, it's like, ugh, come on, you know, but yeah.
So this is not perfectly related to this, but I'm just curious, cause I have a side that I'm on this. And I'll give that story first. So looking back, I mean, the music career you had to move on from as a pursuit for financial gain.
Right.
Looking back for myself in college, and then shortly after college, but specifically college, my view of my skill set in music was much higher than it actually was in reality.
I see what you're saying.
And now I'll preface this by saying, like, I've always been impressed by your skill, and I think you're at a different level, as well as Nikki, as I was. But I had this, when I had a band outside of worship in college, because I led worship in front of a bunch of people every other week. A lot of people knew me. And so we could get a good amount of people out to a concert.
Yeah.
And we weren't terrible, but we weren't like novel. And so in my mind, I thought legit. We could make it.
Yeah,
like,
totally, yeah.
I thought maybe this is the path I'm supposed to pursue.
Yeah.
It's not just vocational ministry, but like actual like music.
I'm
a
rock star.
And God clearly like let a few dominoes fall.
Yeah.
And now hindsight, looking back, I go like, man, I was overconfident in my skill set. So I'm just curious from your perspective, and you don't have to speak about Nikki.
Yeah.
But for yourself, like, do you feel like you were overconfident in your ability, or do you think things just didn't line up?
I think it might even be the opposite, actually, where I was just talking with a friend about this who's in movies too, but like, I actually think it's an asset to think that you're better than you are. Like,
for sure.
You know, like people who have success go around telling everybody else that they're the best, they're the greatest, you know? So there's something about like humility doesn't help that much in terms of like marketing yourself as a creative person. However, it's like better for your soul to have
Yes.
humility. So
And
that's
there's a balance there.
That's an interesting tension. Yeah. And you don't want to be self-deprecating for no reason, but like, but I think, you know, we would be at like a party or something and people would say, what do you do? And I would have a hard time saying, I'm a music producer. I would say like, well, I do this and this, and I'm also like, I'm really into making music. And Nikki would always be like, you need to just tell people you're a music producer. I don't think I had enough confidence to say that I am that. So that
could have potentially negatively impacted that trajectory.
Totally. And you know, the people that I knew that had success in like my friend group, you know, like they had no problem like walking up to people and telling them that what they did and like how good they were at it and like getting people on board. Yeah. So that's sort of interesting. Like you know, you want to have a healthy, you know, perspective on your like smallness in the universe. But at the same time, it's like, this is something I try to share with people like from my YouTube channel or something. Like, you know, like only you, Greg, were making the music that you were making. Like better, or people are always going to be better at everything than everybody. Right. So it's like, it's more just about like bringing your own unique set of skills and perspective to the table. You know, that's what makes it cool. That's why we can all do art, you know?
Yeah. That's fun. Yeah. So let's shift this more into a spiritual direction. And, you know, I think it's easier to potentially see like God into the decision to do the worship and have that season. Where would you say God was? And I'm not saying that he wasn't, but where was he in this decision to pursue music for so long? Like, how was God a part of those decision-making processes?
Yeah, I think a part of it for sure was a sense that I could be a light in a pretty dark, a very dark industry. Let's just come out and say it.
Yeah.
And you know, like my producer name, I chose like a producer name, like as kind of a joke on the fact that like, you know, everybody knew that I was a Christian. So like they would not make fun, but like tease or whatever, you know, sure. And not invite me to the like after parties because they knew that I wouldn't be interested. There was something about that where I think I've always, like, kind of like you were saying earlier, I've always felt like a little bit more natural in around people who maybe don't believe the same things I do because, I don't know, but I feel comfortable being myself in those environments.
Yeah.
I thought that it would be a good service to God to just be a light and a beacon in those areas.
Do you have an example of a time God used you in that way?
Yeah. I mean, I would maybe have to like ponder to think of some story that was like hard hitting, but it was more just the day in and day out kind of stuff. I was at least able to be myself in an industry that doesn't have that. That doesn't often have that, you know, in it. So
maybe like from my side of things. So we'll talk about working in the restaurant.
Yeah.
The restaurant can often feel like a dark place
totally.
as well.
Of course,
like, because there's a wide variety of people who work at a restaurant. You have a lot of younger people who it's their first job. They're kind of getting into things. You have a lot of people in transition seasons, or musician, actor, something that they need to cover the gaps. And you have a lot of lifers who like haven't found, they either love it, and there is that. You know, I worked at a chain restaurant, CPK. So most people, there were a few who loved it, but most people like were just trying to progress in that field and maybe didn't see another opportunity outside of the restaurant world.
Yeah.
But what I found for myself as being a believer in that context is that in the beginning stages, like you're kind of, not ostracized, but kind of like teased for being different.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember like I was focused on celibacy, ahead of marriage. And I had one of the girls come up to me and be like, "You're literally the only virgin I've ever met." Something like that, which is an absurd statement that makes no sense.
Totally.
Like, it's not truth, but I found when I would go to one of the restaurants next door after we all got off and have a beer and sit there and have a beer with them in a casual context, they'd be able to start asking more like real questions. And I think that a lot of that scene, as well as I'm guessing the music scene, it lacks some depth. A lot of it is surface level, like trying to level up, trying to show you are one way or another. And so I found like some of those conversations were some of the most fruitful. Where I was able to just like gently share. Again, it was related to celibacy. Like someone like, I just don't get it at all.
Yeah, like what's wrong with you?
But like even like biblically, like why would God make a rule like this? And just be able to gently share like, man, I don't think that it was made. God didn't do that to deprive people of joy and fun. God knew that you having one specific partner only leads to far more intimacy.
Right.
You don't compare that relationship to any other physical relationship. And it was designed for something different than what you perceive it to be. And even at our church this weekend, they were having a series about love, and it's aimed at people who aren't married yet, and was kind of sharing some different stuff. And he was saying that scientists have studied that like the intoxication of just infatuation that you have in the early stages of a relationship and is exemplified in a physical relationship typically wear off within 18 to 24 months. And so a lot of those things that you start because the passion's there don't lead you to a strong relationship down the road. So that's a super side example, but did you feel like overall in general, like being able to be authentic in who you were in your faith amongst people who are not all vapid or not deep, but did you feel like that led to more openness?
Yeah, it definitely led to interesting conversations and questions and things like kind of like what you're saying. Before it even gets to a conversation about God, like sometimes you can have conversations about life and, you know, your where you stand in the world and that kind of thing, especially if you're writing a song with somebody, because like, you'll writing a song is kind of like a personal thing. So it's like there's the artist is, because I would, have an artist in the studio and we would write a song together and they would be talking about life. And so you're working out like a lyric or something like that. And you kind of are like, well, what, I would say, what about, like, I think there was one time where I used the phrase like bent but not broken or something, so like you can like drop even some biblical stuff in there, stealthily, but like, obviously like this is a sort of a side issue too, but like the Bible is the greatest work of literature ever, and it's like the word of God, and there's so much depth and creative richness in it. And so like as a Christian, you have this like amazing resource of beauty and truth and like human experience and all of this stuff. And so I think that was sort of like one way to bring my faith to a session in a way that's not like, why don't we write a song about Jesus? But it's more just like God created us and, created each of us in his image, which I think is in a big part is like as creative people people. Like we create as well. And that's like what it means to be made in his image, at least in part. And so that to me was a really cool way to be authentic, like in a studio session like that.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
So one of the common themes and tie-throughs in this podcast is going to be about identity. And so identity and purpose are very closely tied.
Yep.
And in our Christian walk, I think it's even more evident. So we tend to, as humans, pull our identity from the wrong things. And it's very natural.
Yep.
I learned early on when I got an engineering degree and then immediately went to waiting tables.
Yeah.
And I waited on a table of 12 engineers, including one who had just graduated from Cal Poly.
Wow. Yeah.
That was one of those key moments in my life where I realized I'm holding too much to my identity and my vocation. Can you tell me maybe a time where you felt your identity pulling in the wrong direction in your vocation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's something I think I'm still wrestling with, honestly. I mean, I had an experience lately where I was sort of I was asked to like mentor a young kid, like a 14-year-old making this awesome music, and so he wanted to just come and sit with me and get some advice or something. And I remember just feeling like, man, I wish I had started when I was 14. And like he was super talented, and I just had this moment where it was like it felt like that was in the past, and it was like kind of painful in a way, because yeah, I think I still wrestle with wondering how much of myself, like, did I pour my identity into that, and like I would try to wake up every day and like tell myself that my identity is in Christ, but still, like, it's really tough. It's super tough, especially when you're excited about something or you're passionate about it. Like, you just feel connected to it. Yeah, and I think God gives you that as a gift as well. So it's natural to have that sort of push and pull. But honestly, I think having a kid made a big difference, where it was like all of a sudden what occupied my mind and my spirit was like thinking about my kid. And so it was like you don't feel like you're in your own body, like moving through the universe anymore. You're kind of like above, like looking at their life or something. So that definitely, like having our kid, we had kids like we were married for a long time before we had kids.
Yep.
So that definitely made a change. But then also, like, coming back to the beginning of the question, like how do you measure success in that like realm? There's something there too, where I'll be so real here, but like, Spotify sends you like your monthly listeners, or whatever, every month, and like sometimes I'll get an email and it says you had one listener, like on my artist account, and I go like, but I've started to go like, that's awesome. Like, it's awesome that one person in Germany like listened to my song. Like, if that doesn't, I started to realize, like, if one person isn't enough, 10 million isn't going to be enough, like, because it's not about the number of people who like you, like the dollar amount in your bank account or whatever it is, like, there's never going to be a threshold that crosses where you say, now I'm okay, and now I can rest in my identity as a music producer. Like, that will never ever happen, which is why, like, even famous successful artists go crazy, because it's never enough. But like, if one person isn't enough, 10 million isn't enough. And so, like, sometimes I'll get those emails and I'm like, yeah, one person, that's so cool, because it's really more about, do you enjoy creating, And if you can get to the place where you enjoy using the gift that God gave you in your creativity or your vocation or whatever it is, like, then that's how you can be at peace, like as an act of worship and thanksgiving to God that he gave you this gift. And like, I'm going to use the talents that I've been given and try to just multiply them and like leave the rest up to him.
Yeah, that's beautiful perspective. Yeah, I think as you were talking, it made me think of something that, and maybe this is American Christianity, but something that happens that I think leads to us having false identity is like, you can be in a room, let's call it a room of 1,000 people, and we'll make it 100, smaller, 100 Christians. And in that room is one person who is caring for the needs of one other person on the daily basis. Mm-hmm. Every day they're relying on the Lord's provision just to get by. Mm-hmm. And God is using them profoundly in this one person's life, but you wouldn't know about it without deeply talking to them. Right. And then you have a Christian YouTuber who has 8 million subscribers. Yeah. The room is naturally going to enjoy, praise, pursue, even though they're all Christians, this one, and give them perceived value of higher. Yeah. Even though God is not using that other person. You could say they're using them more, but like the impact that this one person is having on a single person's life may be more profound than this on many. And so I think we can easily be deceived 100%. By what the masses think rather than actually like, God, what do you think of me? Yeah. Like, exactly. Here's where I am today. Yeah. Like, what do you think of me? Is there something else I should be doing? Yeah. And I think that's hard. It's easier to perceive praise from loud external voices. Totally. Than hearing it in the whispers from the Lord. Especially if it's something that actually has like a number on it, like YouTube subscribers or Spotify monthly listeners or Instagram followers, or the number of people in your church, you know? Yeah. I'm sure pastors have a tough time with that. Like, yeah. It's really tough. Yeah. 'Cause God's economy is different, you know? And it's like, that's where you're like, the upside down kingdom of God it looks different from how we look, and like our glory is not his glory. And so, but it's one thing to sort of know that on paper, and it's another thing to like integrate it into your daily like mental health, you know, if that's the water that you swim in. It's super hard. Do you feel like you have any tools to help you stay grounded in your true identity? At the risk of just sermonizing, but it's just like, you have to be in community. You have to read your Bible and pray. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I would say it's like, if you're speaking directly to people who may be in like a creative field, like you gotta be around people who aren't in that too, because otherwise you will get sucked into, like, you don't, like, fish don't know they're wet. So like there are things that influence you that you're not even aware of. So I would recommend being around other people. Like, this is kind of silly, but I never was super into sports until I like really was pursuing my music career, because it was like spiritually satisfying for me to watch like a meritocracy, really. Like, sports is like, you know, the better team wins, like, usually, but like, you know, so it's like a somewhat of a fair fight and a competition. So I got really into sports, like, yeah. And it was a way of sort of like, you know, what's it called? Like clearing the palate so I could taste again. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. So I want to take a quick turn towards changing career paths from this creative to working at a nonprofit.
Yeah.
What was the catalyst for that change? And, you briefly alluded to like God's provision.
Yeah.
Like the fact that you were in the hospital when that interview.
Yeah.
And often I feel like God does show up with last minute delivery.
Yeah.
And
I don't know.
so what was the catalyst to make that change?
Yeah.
And how has God met you in this season?
Yep. I mean, honestly, the catalyst isn't that much more complicated than just like I needed a steadier lifestyle, and like it was, it just didn't seem like it was going to work out without that. Where the challenge came is like I had this sort of weird gap in my resume where was making music. So a couple things. So because I was always trying to figure out a way to like hustle and make a couple extra bucks, like I had learned all these sort of random skills, like a little bit of video editing, like a little bit of digital marketing and all this stuff. And it was just because like I was trying to do something. So I was trying to like make courses and sell them or whatever. It turns out that like that was really helpful. So like one lesson I think that I can impart is like it's okay to dabble in stuff, and like people might raise their eyebrows like if you're like I'm gonna start a YouTube channel, or I mean you're all about this, like you've got like a million things that you're always juggling, so but you learn something from each of them, and you sort of don't know where that skill is gonna be able to take you later until you go down the road. So okay, so that's one thing. But then it was just like I don't think I'm going to be able to financially provide for my family. Like our goal was to have to be able to survive on a single income. So that's what necessitated the seeking out of a job. And then I pursued a lot of things, and it was I was rejected many times, and I didn't even really know like where to go or what to do or like what was going on. And this was like in the middle of COVID too, so that was kind of strange. And got to the point where I was sort of reaching out to just contact just people that I knew. And we had been donors to this nonprofit in New York City for like 8 or 9 years. And so I reached out to them, and I just basically wrote this email that was like, hey guys, I love you. I can do this, and this. Like, if that sounds cool, like I would love to. And it totally ended up being the right place at the right time. And so that was really, really cool. Like, and I've been there a couple of years now.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so as a creative, and you're still using creative skills in your job, but it's not the dream.
Yeah.
It's shifted off. Yeah. How do you maintain joy in your role? Does it require like external creative outlets, or how do you like, I think sometimes we can like, here's my dream, and God kind of shifts us, and we can easily go into just like a negative mindset. Like, man, I just have to do this. Yeah. So like, how do you keep a positive mindset in this different career path?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, so it's coming back again to the question of how do you measure success, because I'm still making music like a lot, I mean, maybe not as much, like not all day, every day, but I still make stuff and like will produce for other people or whatever. And so, and like I do contract work for a friend's church. I'm mixing their service every Sunday. So like I get to do music, a lot still. things don't have to be black and white usually, like, but there may be sometimes where it is, but I'm just saying for me it wasn't. And like, I can still call myself a music producer if I'm producing music, like, but like I'm getting a paycheck from a different job. So, and I'm also very, very blessed in the sense that like I can be creative at my work, at my work. So that's very great. Again, it comes back to like, am I tying my identity to the like, financial remuneration that I'm getting from like making this music, or am I tying my identity to, this is a passion and a skill that I have that I can just do for fun, or for myself or whatever.
All right. I have a couple more questions. Yeah. What's one decision or thing that you had to make that wouldn't make sense to the world, but you knew that God needed you to do that?
So like, yeah, it sort of requires a God perspective for it to make sense.
Yeah. Like, like tithing doesn't make sense to the world.
Yeah.
These different, waiting until marriage to have sex doesn't make sense to the world. But I think within business, there's so many like tax loopholes, these different ways to get ahead that some Christians may say like, that's fine.
Yeah.
Like, so like,
everybody
can you think of a specific or any specific examples of ways that God called you to do something different?
Yeah. There was one situation where we had written a song and there was a possibility of getting a featured like verse from a famous person who's like famous for reasons that are not, that sort of, go against what I think people's best version of themselves should be. That was so vague, but like without...
I get what you're saying.
Okay, so but this person has like millions and millions of followers or fans or whatever. So I had to be the one to say, I'm not comfortable with like embracing this opportunity, which might like honestly might have been like a ticket to like a serious money, basically. But you also never know. So like, it's a dangerous game to play. It was a very awkward and it was definitely like the beginning of the end of like one of my music relationships because of that. Yeah. And there were like a bunch of things that were like that, because honestly, like every day was some sort of moral dilemma like that, where you're like, I could do this. Is it on the edge? Is it appropriate or not? But this one like was outside of the bounds for me, and so I had to just be like, I don't know. But then luckily it didn't end up like happening anyway. So it was not fully my decision. Like I was in as part of a group, so that was that. How do I be in the world but not of the world? Question that is a constant source of tension, and I would only say to like listeners who are maybe find themselves in those situations, that's to like have some grace for yourself even, and like some like trust that God's not going to give you something beyond your what you're capable of, and like he's going to equip you with the right arguments to make, and he's going to guide you, like because there were certain things that like I was, like you said, tax things or whatever, like you're like, I'm not sure about this, I don't know, this is hard, this is really hard. And so those are going to come up, but that's where faith comes in, so have some grace with yourself for getting through those times.
Yeah, and I think it's also kind of tricky because, like, I think in those steps of faith, like, we want immediate, like, recognition of that. Like, hey, guys, like, I'm giving up money here by not doing this. Like, I'm giving up fame.
Yeah.
And most of the reaction you probably got was negative.
Yeah.
But that again is us taking a step back and recognizing our identity in Christ.
Yeah.
And that it isn't based on these external inputs. But like knowing I walked in step with what the Lord called me to.
Yeah.
This doesn't seem to make sense to others.
Yeah.
Sometimes even other believers.
Yeah.
But I know that this is what was
Yeah.
right.
Right.
Thinking back, and you can either use yourself, like little Dylan,
Little Dilly.
when he was 18
Yeah,
or
yeah.
coming up near the end of college, or just if you want to envision other people like you,
Yeah.
even this 14-year-old you
Yeah.
just mentored. What is one or a few pieces of advice you would give to specifically a Christian considering going into the music field?
Yeah. So if you're a Christian, you're going into music, right? And this probably applies to anything creative,
Sure,
really.
yeah.
But I would say it's so important to discover and like remain true to your own voice. And voice, I mean metaphorically, like what you feel called to say or something like that. I think one thing where I maybe, it's not that I went wrong, but it caused more heartache than it needed to, was like I was not sure where my place in that world was. Like I was kind of I was just sort of letting my circumstances lead me around in a lot of ways. I think if I could go back and redo, I would maybe like do what I wanted to do, make the music I wanted to make, write the songs I wanted to write, and like not care what anybody else said, rather than how I did it. It's very hard when you're 18 to like know what that is, but that's my counsel is like spend a lot of time sort of in the wilderness, discovering what you want to say, what you want to bring to the table. It like gives you a course. Like I'm going to stay on this course. I'm going to do what I feel like is my calling to do. That makes that a lot easier, especially in a creative industry where like everybody's trying to push and pull you in different directions. And I even saw this, like I worked for a little while at a music law firm. So we had like a bunch of rappers that were our clients. And it was really interesting to see their like art interacting with this whole world of lawyers and business managers and labels and producers. And like, I was just like, man, this is crazy. Like, so, but like the ones who I think ended up having like a real good career were the ones who, before they got famous, like had a long time where they figured out who their identity was, like as an artist, and got to like stick with that. So that's key. And I think it's probably like a good advice for any career that you're in, so that you're not being pushed and pulled around by different forces. Yeah, that's maybe one piece of advice.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you having this conversation with me.
Thanks, man.
We've gone back 2004, so that's 20 years.
Don't say it. We were young once.
Yes. And, as I think just like a piece of advice for young people listening to this, people who, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. I turned 40 this week, which is kind of crazy.
This week?
This week.
When's your birthday?
It's on Thursday.
Happy birthday.
But turning 40, like I'm currently in this season. Dylan and I both happened to move to North Carolina.
Yeah, baby.
From California Dylan just over a year ago and me a few months ago. But I think that what we easily want as humans in general, but even as Christians, is a clear defined path vocationally that we just walk into and we feel fully empowered by the Spirit in what we're doing constantly.
Yeah.
And I'm in a transition season where what I've built with video production and some of the other things that I'm doing, like I feel like God's asking me to have open hands of surrender, and I fully don't know what the future is of my career. And, you're a few years in and you're still figuring out long term what is going to be best for your family as you provide for them, and that lovely thing called inflation. But I think it's okay to have a career path that isn't straight.
Does anybody have that thing that you said earlier? Or they're like,
I think at least
in
our
seasons or
parents' generation, and I think we've shifted too far. They were possibly too far on the side of you stay in one job and career path your entire career because it's stable and safe. And our generation and the generations past us are leaning maybe too far into the passion.
Yeah.
Like you have to enjoy and love what you're doing.
Right.
And sometimes that neglects the provision.
Yeah.
And, but I think if you can find this stability mixed with pursuing the Lord in all the gift sets you have, he can use you in some incredible ways. Yeah. And sometimes it's literally just taking small outlets like this podcast, for example. I don't know what will come of it, what the long term of it is, but I feel like God laid it on my heart to speak to, hopefully some women get value out of this as well, but specifically men who are 18 in college, maybe in their 20s or 30s, really like growing up and trying to figure out how God wants to use them and how they can live in their vocation filled with passion that is spirit filled. Yeah. Not just like, I love music. Right. I love video. I love photography. I love whatever it may be, but just like empowered by the Spirit to use your giftings. Yeah. And sometimes that doesn't look like us doing exactly like, both of us had the dream of music at one point, like having a career where music, we become famous, like financially everything's easy. I think a lot of times for me specifically, the Lord meets me closest when I need him the most, rather than getting into a place where things feel easy. And so hopefully this episode has been helpful, especially for creatives, but anyone just kind of processing this career path. And as we interview more people in the future, my hope is that you would just be filled with joy and peace. There's this scripture in Romans that a good friend of mine who passed away would share at the end of every service that says, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit, you may overflow with hope. And so I just hope that as you listen to these episodes, that you would be encouraged and know that you don't have to be, we may not hit a goal destination before death here, vocationally, but as long as you're persisting in that purpose day in and day out, God will use you, equip you, and make you a vessel to bring him glory, which is our ultimate goal.
Well said.
Awesome.
I agree.
Well, we'll see you in the next one.
Sounds good.